Hi everyone, I'm Jeff and with me is Kati, and together we're psychologists from the Office of Chief Psychologist. And for today, we'll be sharing with you our study that examined the initial experiences of investigation officers with the conduct of video recorded interviews in Singapore. And this is our research team. And this is the scope of our presentation. So video recorded interviews of the entire investigative interview is one of the most common safeguards proposed against false confessions and wrongful convictions, not just in Singapore, but internationally. They said to discourage the use of coercive techniques to elicit confessions, allows for more accurate assessments of voluntariness and veracity of suspect statements, and more importantly, protects officers from frivolous allegations. We implemented video recorded interviewing in Singapore in 2018. Generally, there are quite high levels of public confidence in the police force in Singapore, and allegations of wrongful convictions in Singapore are very rare. So the implementation of VRI was part of the government's continued efforts to maintain public confidence in the criminal justice system. Planning started way before 2018, and we took the phased approach, which allows for the calibration of implementation efforts along the way. And we started with select serious sexual crimes and drug offenses. Previous research in VRI have looked at two broad areas. One would be the technical aspects of VRI. Essentially, the studies have looked at questions like, should the whole interview be recorded or just a confession? Should the camera be visible or hidden? And how would it affect the individuals involved in the interview? Who should the camera capture? And how should evidence from VRI be used? And another area of research generally looked at the impacts and benefits of VRI. And these are some of the benefits. I'll go into more details regarding this. So here are some of the impact and benefits of VRI. Recent research on the effect of VRI on suspects have suggested that there seems to be minimal impact. So suspects are as likely to make admissions. Their statements tend to contain similar amount of details. In terms of impact or benefits of VRI for officers, studies have suggested that it allows officers to focus on talking to the suspect without having to take notes. That reduces cognitive load on officers and allows for rapport building and a smooth conversation flow. VRI have also been found to be effective in tackling the issue of false confessions. Essentially, it discourages the use of coercive interview tactics. So despite our previous research, we've noted that there seems to be a gap in terms of there has been quite limited research on the process of VRI implementation in organizations. It is well established that evidence-based practice or science do not readily transfer to operational settings, and previous research and experiences have suggested that generally it takes about 17 years for an idea evidence-based practice to be translated and transferred into actual operational practice. And there are common implementation barriers such as readiness of staff. Staff may lack knowledge, the skills, there may be lack of resources and infrastructure to implement the practice. And oftentimes there need to be concerted and deliberate efforts needed to bridge the research to practice gap. It's the same within law enforcement as well, that researchers have suggested that it's difficult to introduce research-based initiatives into real-life practice. So we thought the understanding of the facilitators and barriers to VRI implementation during the process of implementation can help organizations better engage in change management practice and promote the uptake of VRI, and in turn, this increases the likelihood of implementation success. So with this in mind, study objectives was really to provide insights to potential facilitators and barriers to VRI implementations during the process of implementation. We did this study when we implemented VRI. VRI implementation was in its second to third year, and the insights were from the perspective of practitioners. Next, I'll hand over to Karthi, who will share with you the methods we use and also our findings.
Thanks, Jeff. So in terms of methodology, we conducted 11 focus groups with 92 out of the 380 investigation officers who were active in conducting VRI at that point of time in Singapore. We reached out with two main criteria. Number one, we were looking for officers who were actively conducting VRI, and number two, officers who have conducted VRI for roughly more than 7 times. So officers came with a range of experience as seen in the table over here, with the mean number of VRI conducted being about 15 VRIs. On the next slide, we also see that they also come with various demographics in terms of gender, age, and years of service. So we move on to the next slide. Each focus group itself lasted approximately about 1.5 hours, and these were the broad questions that we used in the interview guide. So we looked at overall experiences, the impact of VRI, and any feedback with regards to training, and how could we possibly enhance VRI itself. So all focus groups were audio recorded and transcribed, and we also conducted thematic analysis with the transcripts. So moving on to the next slide. This will be the 5 top-line findings that we came with from our focus group study, and we'll be looking at each of them in greater detail with verbatims extracted from each of these findings. So firstly, we'll be looking at how VRI increases officers' self-awareness and concerns about appearing professional. So moving on to the next slide, take one more slide down, and these are some of the key findings that we found from officers itself. So officers tend to share that they tend to become self-conscious with VRI. This could be in terms of their behavior, how they carry themselves, how they sit, the mannerisms, and in fact, the way they talk. This is also linked with regards to their preparation. So with VRI right now, officers can also perceive themselves to be, or they may think of themselves as not being unprofessional when they are being recorded on VRI. And they're also concerned about the formality of language used and how it may appear in recording itself. So in the last verbatim here, we do see an officer who's sharing how he uses Google Translate with VRI to ensure the professionalism of words used. Moving on to the next top-line finding. The next top-line finding shows how the officers express concerns about rapport building. So now we'll be looking at some of the verbatims over here. And the first point might be unique to Singapore and other Asian countries, where the language used, the formal language used is English, but we also do use colloquial languages. And when we're trying to be professional, officers tend to feel the need to use formal English. However, this may seem to be affecting rapport building and may be conflicting with the idea of appearing professional. Officers also share the limited scope for rapport building with VRI, as now there's certain power dynamics such as the officer and the interviewee, instead of both of them coming off with an equal footing. Hence, officers also tend to build rapport during the setup of VRI itself, meaning prior to VRI, where they try to build rapport, and then they do ask some basic questions once VRI has begun. Thirdly, the third top-line finding is that officers seek feedback and validation from court outcomes regarding what constitutes acceptable behaviors. And when we look at the quotes, we do see officers sharing how they are uncertain with regards to what constitutes robustness in interviews. And there seems to be gray areas, and they are hoping to get clarity on what is the definition of robustness in interviews itself, and how this could be perceived in court. So we do see verbatims about how officers are concerned of how it will come across when they're interrupting suspects who may actually go astray from the account that's being shared in the interview, and how it may come across if they're being too friendly with the interviewee, and it may come across as being too friendly or as a form of inducement. We also note in the next top-line finding that administrative workload, infrastructure, and training are key to the uptake of VRI. When we look at the verbatims shared by participants, they do share that VRI itself is good. They do see the benefits of VRI, but it's rather the process that's before and after VRI that is tiring and tedious. Officers also do highlight that training is crucial and prepares them well for VRI implementation itself. And when they're familiar with the SOPs, they tend not to worry about it and they just jump straight into the interview. We also do note that infrastructure affects confidence of VRIs, and when officers feel that the infrastructure isn't as ready or they're not as confident in the infrastructure, it then affects their confidence. Moving on to the next key finding. The last key finding is that officers with more experience with VRI tend to also have favorable opinions of VRI. So when we look at verbatims over here, what we do see is that normally, or rather officers are conscious of VRI. However, over time, they do tend to, this self-consciousness tends to normalize over time, and they get to be more familiar with the practice and how to conduct the VRIs itself. Officers also share how they ask better questions on camera. They do try to improve and enhance their questioning skills. And when they're more familiar with VRI, it tends to be more difficult for them to go back to the traditional means of written statements. Having said that, when we look at the next slide, we also do see that officers do in fact see the value of VRI. So VRI tends to capture what officers are unable to capture in written statements, what cannot be captured in paper and pen format. This could be in terms of expressions or in the tonality of things being said. And in fact, officers do share that suspects take the interview seriously, because now video recording, it seems that they are being brought in for a very serious crime, and they do not tend to play around. Next, we also do see that in terms of implications, our study does suggest that the perceptions and experiences of officers are key to the success of VRI implementation. Regular monitoring, communication, and timely intervention hence is important to facilitate such change management efforts. Our findings do suggest that officers require regular feedback in terms of uncertainty about acceptable behaviors, about rapport building, about what constitutes professionalism, and management should also do regular check-ins and encourage feedbacks in the form of either town halls or focus group discussions. And there should also be regular review of training infrastructure needs, maintenance, and admin workload done, as these issues here tend to affect confidence and uptake of VRI. As we see, experience does play a key role in the implementation of VRI, and experienced officers then can be tapped on to be change ambassadors. And ultimately, given time and support, officers tend to adapt well and endorse VRI. So with that, we've come to the end of our sharing. So thank you very much for your time, and please do let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.